With that, I would like to introduce and welcome our keynote speaker, Sanjay Pradhan.
Thank you. Good morning. Can you hear me? So it's absolutely lovely to be here. What they were referring to, that it was a 10-hour journey from Washington to Toronto. That's because of flight issues. But I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I can't imagine a better forum. I mean, this view is truly breathtaking. I'm in one of my most beautiful cities in the world. I'm in Toronto, with Ontario, which is our selected, it was one of our subnational pioneers, which was selected from a very vigorous global competition. And to be part of this very important event, where you're engaging in a dialogue to develop Ontario's action plan. So let me begin with a story which demonstrates the impact that open government can have in the lives of ordinary citizens. So for this, let me take you to the UK, to the so-called Bristol babies scandal in the year 2001. And shockingly, one of the biggest public inquiries into the workings of the UK National Health Services found that the mortality rates for babies undergoing heart operation at the Bristol Royal Infirmary was double the mortality rate that found in other hospitals. Shockingly also, the review found that the lives of at least 170 babies could have been saved had these surgeries been performed elsewhere. The review found a whole series of lax safety measures. It found, disturbingly, secrecy about doctors' performances, an old boys culture which actually sanctioned this behavior, and a lack of monitoring by management. Following this review, the heart surgeons decided to proactively publish data on the mortality rates from heart operations for individual surgeons and individual hospitals, so that citizens could make more informed decisions about their babies. And the evaluation that was taken place after 5 years found that the mortality rates had dropped dramatically by as much as 21% for coronary surgeries and by 33% for aortic valve replacements. This is a dramatic example of how disclosing precious government data to citizens can really impact their lives, in this case, literally save their lives. But it's equally important to stress that open government is much more, as the minister just said, much more than just opening data. Today, if you look, China and Russia are also selectively sharing information with their public, selectively. So open government requires much more than data. It requires enabling citizens to freely speak, to freely associate, to freely assemble. It involves empowering citizens to have a dialogue, as we've just learned, to shape policies and services that they care most about. It requires that citizens be empowered to monitor and oversee government. In other words, it requires opening government to citizens. This is what the Open Government Partnership, or OGP, was created to achieve. In the words of one of our founders, President Obama, former President Obama, the objective of launching OGP was to ensure that governments truly serve their citizens rather than serving themselves. And the mechanism that OGP uses to achieve this goal is through a partnership that you see displayed in this room. It's a partnership between reformers in government and civil society that join together, as we are seeing in this room, to co-create commitments and action plans to make governments more open, transparent, participatory, responsible, accountable to citizens. Now, in the last year, the expansion of OGP from national to local, through which Ontario joined us, which we are very grateful for, is another very important step to achieve this goal, because it's at the local level that government is closest to its citizens and can most affect its life. the lives of citizens. So what I'd like to do is to take you through, even though this view is so stunning, so you can stay with this, but I'd like to take you through a virtual tour around the world to show you concrete stories and examples of what OGP national and local actors are doing to really impact lives of ordinary citizens. And I've clustered this around 5 frontiers of open government, 5 frontiers through which citizens are being empowered through open government. The first frontier is arming citizens with information that really make a difference for them. Now, right here, as we've heard from the minister, from NOSA, from deputy minister, Ontario is a leader in the area of open data. Your open data directive, making government data open by default, massive amounts of information. I'm no expert on what you're doing in Ontario, but last I saw, you have disclosed 2,336 data sets covering 32 ministries and agencies. That's really impressive, and the first subnational government to join the International Open Data Charter. But you know, the real frontier we find in open data in OGP in the second generation is also something that Ontario is doing right now, which is not just releasing overall data, but releasing data which actually makes a difference, which is a data in high demand area for citizens which they can use. And so, for instance, Ontario's release of healthcare provider information data, which then spawned the social enterprise minister, as the minister said, IamSick.ca, which I also found fascinating, which is a great way to actually improve the access of health information to ordinary citizens. If I had to take you through to another part of the world, in Uruguay, just to give you a tour to another part of the world, in Uruguay, ordinary citizens faced a real challenge because they had to decide on healthcare for their families, but they had imperfect information. And the challenge in Uruguay was that once you actually signed on to a healthcare provider, you were locked into it for 3 years. So through the OGP process, through a similar process that you're going through right now, government and civil society created what has now become an award-winning platform in open government. It's called Atu Servicio, through which citizens can now access detailed information on healthcare providers. They can compare their costs, they can even compare their wait times, and therefore make much more informed decision. A great example of citizens being empowered with information to control their lives. If I take you to the city of Skopje in Macedonia, there the release of data on air pollution hugely generated increased awareness of citizens on what harm pollution was doing for them. But you know, the turning point became, the turning point for civic activism became when there was a young IT student, his name is Goryan Yavanovsky, who developed an app called a My Air app. And through this My Air app, he actually showed what the nature of the problem is. This app ended up reaching 62% of all adults below 55 years. It really spawned civic activism in Skopje. And they then started demanding that the government take action. So it was a collaboration, and already 2 factories have been shut down, and there are many municipalities that are taking actions, remedial actions in peak pollution times. So open data that actually is focused in high demand areas for citizens makes open data come alive and really has an impact. That's just the first frontier. The second frontier we find in OGP is not just releasing information to citizens, but having citizens give feedback on critical public services that they care about, and the government then taking action. So I take you to another part of the world, La Libertad, Peru, which is another OGP subnational or local pioneer alongside Ontario. And the problem here was that citizens were falling sick, and they suffered from infections and diseases because of lack of access to safe water and sanitation. So again, through a similar co-creation process, reformers from government and civil society created a digital mapping tool, a platform, by which Peruvians in La Libertad could actually specifically visualize the location of these water services and score them for quality. So if I'm an ordinary citizen, now I can actually use this to see, is this water safe enough for my child to drink, for me to take a bath. And it also, the portal provided a provision for citizens to give feedback on the problems they encounter and for the government to solve. Take you to another example in the UK. In the UK, there's a fascinating family and friends test program. It is a feedback tool by which patients can give feedback on whether they would recommend this health service, this doctor, this service provider, to their family and friends. What is interesting is that this platform has now generated 25 million pieces of feedback from patients. And this number rises by 1 million a month, making it the largest source of patient feedback globally around the world. And this is published, so if I'm a patient, I can use this information to make informed decision. Let me show you a last example in this tour on citizen feedback, and it takes you to Mongolia, where citizens were encountering a lot of problems with government delivery of services, garbage not being picked up. You know, Mongolia has these long, cold winters, water pipes would freeze, and they weren't actually getting the services. But today, as part of the OGP process, they have a commitment, which is Check My Services initiative. Using this, ordinary Mongolians can actually use the community scorecard tool to report and rate the service delivery, report on these problems, and follow up on government action. Government is mandated to respond and has improved access to water and so on, water and sanitation. So this is the second frontier where citizens give feedback and government responds. That's the key part, to close the feedback loop. The third frontier is not just citizens giving feedback on service delivery, but going upstream and shaping the very policies that actually concern them. And so for this, let me take you to Paris, as pretty. And there, confronted with a history of distrust and tensions between the city administration and different parts of the Paris community, Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo, she's a fellow OGP local pioneer with you. She's really impressive. She set aside 500 million euros of the city budget, 100 million euros each year, 500 million, which is going to be voted by Parisians online, but also offline in dedicated parts of Paris. But you know, what I find very interesting is after doing this first time, they found that low-income communities in Paris were not engaging enough. So what the mayor, Anne Hidalgo, and the co-creation process of OGP did is in the last OGP action plan in 2017, they provided a dedicated source of funds for those low-income locales. So there actually was an inclusion thrust. Similarly, in Madrid, following one of the worst economic crises in Europe, massive citizen protests, citizens feeling disenfranchised and disempowered, there was a citizen engagement platform called Decide Madrid, which was created, by which ordinary citizens can directly petition mayors, but they can also vote on a 100 million euro participatory budget that has been set aside in Madrid. The interesting fact is that only Facebook in Madrid has more users than the Decide Madrid platform. That's the power of citizen engagement. Right here in Ontario, we heard from the minister, you have your budget talks, which I think is an initiative, which is a very good way for citizens to give feedback. I wanted to mention to you that when citizens feel that they can provide input that government responds to, it can actually build trust in very dramatic ways. And to illustrate that, I just want to give you a last example here from a totally different part of the world. I take you to South Kivu province in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Emerging from civil war, trust between government and citizens is at an all-time low. And to build trust, they too set up a line item of the budget where citizens could vote using mobile phones and town hall meetings. And you know, when citizens saw roads and schools being repaired that they voted for, trust in government grew, and tax collection in South Kivu province jumped 16 times. That shows when citizens feel that the government is working for them because they voted for it, that's a tangible manifestation, a very real one, of what this can mean, the dividends from citizen participation. The fourth frontier that I want to mention is that in these participatory processes, OGP countries are ensuring that the voices of those who have been historically excluded is included. So it's open government for all. This is the inclusion agenda, including women, indigenous communities, and so on. This is a really important one. And here, there are three sub-areas I wanted to just quickly mention to you. The first sub-area, which is possibly one of the most important for Canada today, is advancing gender equality. Why do I say that? We are incredibly fortunate that Canada is going to be, under Prime Minister Trudeau, is going to be our next global co-chair of OGP starting the fall. It's going to lead the partnership. And with a feminist foreign policy, Canada has made inclusion and advancing gender through open government as its central priority. So what this means is that in the co-creation process whether it's in Ontario, but certainly at the federal level, Canada can role model what it means to advance gender equality through open government approaches. And another goal is to inspire the partnership, say 30, 40 countries in the year that Canada will be co-chair, which is the next year, get 30, 40 countries to advance, do transformative commitments in gender. And what does that look like? In Sierra Leone, to give you an example, the OGP process has committed that they will disclose data on gender-based violence. In Colombia, they have used OGP to make a commitment that they will involve women's groups in a participatory assessment of the system of violence against women. Côte d'Ivoire is enhancing women's participation in the budget process. And in Buenos Aires, which is another OGP fellow peer for Ontario, the focus there is to help young women who, because of prevailing cultural norms, have had difficulty in accessing information on contraception and reproductive health services. So the Buenos Aires commitment is to publicly disseminate this data, but also give young women a voice in improving service delivery and in reporting complaints. That's on gender. The other area we are finding in terms of inclusion, which is quite powerful, is OGP countries really reaching out and empowering the most vulnerable in society. So here, if I take you to Austin, Texas, in the US, it's a city with a history of segregation and which concerns people of color, and that also constitutes a lot of the homelessness. So Austin, Texas, has used the OGP process to actually create a homelessness policy, a policy for the homeless, a homeless systems map, which is developed by crowdsourcing inputs from service providers, local communities, but also from the homeless themselves, doctors and lawyers and whoever else has become homeless for whatever reason, empowering those who have been the most voiceless. On indigenous communities, which is obviously a big source of focus in Canada, in Costa Rica, OGP has been used as a process to institutionalize a dialogue between indigenous people and government, rebuilding trust, which has unblocked a history of violence and ushered investment in Costa Rica in indigenous community lands on water, telemedicine, and education. So these were some examples of empowering the most vulnerable. The last area I wanted to mention was on youth in the area of inclusion. And you have done, as we heard, you have done very interesting work with the Youth Engagement Platform. Here, I just wanted to mention, if I could, I wanted to make a suggestion that Canada could even go further, if I can make a suggestion. And the idea is to focus not just on all the youth, but also to focus on youth migrants. And I say this because Canada has been truly an inspirational global leader in championing welcoming migrants. Open government can be a complementary process for helping with the integration of the migrants. So in Germany, which as you know also has had to take a real stance on integrating migrants, the first German OGP National Action Plan has a commitment to recognize, reward, and disseminate the most innovative practices of local communities in integrating migrants into the local community. Tunisia, which faces a problem of youth radicalization, has used OGP to solicit from youth its pain points and respond to it. So combining the two, because radicalization of youth comes about not because of poverty, but because of grievance and exclusion. So including youth and youth migrants can be a very important frontier in this. So let me then turn to the very last frontier. I talked about 4. The last frontier that we find in OGP are where citizens are being empowered to monitor, to follow the public money and to track corruption. And this is a very important area because citizens, when they feel that the government is working for itself or for powerful elites, it builds cynicism. So I take you to Italy. And in Italy, there's a very interesting platform called Monithon, which the government has used to disclose data on 1 million projects for 100 billion euros, which they got from EU funds, which citizens can track the implementation of. And the interesting thing there is students have been trained to be on-the-ground auditors. They found a mafia center, a youth center which was blocked by the mafia. They used this process to unblock the constraints for that. I take you to Ukraine, which if you follow Ukraine or Russia these days, you know there's a very powerful role that oligarchs play in capturing state policies and procurement processes. And amidst a whole bunch of scandals around multi-million-dollar kickbacks in infrastructure projects, young reformers used the OGP process. There was a young youth guy who won the Global OGP Award, joined together with reformers in government and private sector to create a platform called Prozoro. What Prozoro does is it makes all government contracts online in open data standards, which means that a citizen can search any contract readily. But it also does Dozoro, which is the second generation, where citizens can flag violations and actually expect a response. In just 2 years, this has led to a savings in Ukraine of $1 billion. And this is now spreading as an emerging global norm in OGP with 24 national and 4 subnational governments adopting open contracting. The last example I'll just go through very quickly was in the area of lobbying. In Chile and Ireland, where there's a concern about powerful groups capturing the state. And there were scandals in Chile, for instance, on this. So they used the OGP process to create a public lobbying register in Chile and Ireland. So citizens can track the meetings and gifts between public officials and lobbyists. The second generation impact of this has been that citizens are now able to say, if you're meeting the lobbyists, you public official, why not you meet with me? So it has democratized access of ordinary citizens to public officials. So I've just taken you through an exhausting, quick tour around the world to give you an example of different innovative ways in which citizens are being empowered. These are new ways for citizens to assert power beyond the ballot box. And this is what open government can do for the lives of ordinary citizens. But we must also ask what all of us in our role as citizens can do for open government. This civic engagement, this civic advocacy is essential to the heart of OGP. Civic movements, civic advocacy have great power. When people come together and they demand change, they can overcome formidable obstacles. Just last week, you would have followed 800 marches around the world as part of the Never Again campaign against gun violence. Just before coming here, I participated in the Washington, D.C. one. And you know what was profound was the power of young students driven by authenticity, commitment, courage, mobilizing this massive turnout for change. That shows the power of civic engagement. Millions of women have spoken up and have started a real campaign to end inappropriate behavior as part of Me Too and Time's Up campaign. Millions have supported family, friends, neighbors to ensure the winning of LGBTQ rights. This tells us the power of citizen movements, which is what we need in open government. We need citizens to demand that contracts be opened up, budgets be opened up, that they have a voice in shaping particular services. And even if what citizens care about doesn't focus on open government per se, whether it's gender equality or access to health, we have seen from the examples that open government can be a part of the solution to achieving this. So we need citizens, civil society, to advocate, propose, demand changes from government. But in OGP, what makes this potent is on the other side of the table. You have reformers in government who are similarly looking to make change happen. The beauty and power and strength of OGP is it combines the passion of civic activism with the integrity and commitment of reformers in government, which is what I see arrayed around this room. This collective energy, we need a lot more, and we need to multiply it around the world. And we need this more than ever today, because the harsh reality is that open government has never been under greater threat than today. We meet in this beautiful location, but we also meet at a time when democracy is under attack in many parts of the world. Civicus reports that basic civil rights, freedom to speak, freedom to assemble, freedom to associate, has been attacked in over 100 countries. Authoritarianism is on the rise, and the Edelman Barometer reports that citizen trust in government globally is at a historic low. Disturbingly, trust in government has continued to plummet in advanced Western democracies, though Canada has stayed stable. Amazingly, China has emerged as the most trusted nation on earth. What does this say? Populist leaders have used and stoked this distrust to rise in power, and they have called for a wholesale rejection of the system, combined with rising authoritarianism that threatens the very foundation of democracy. So, in this context, open government can be an antidote. It can be a countervailing force with 75 national governments, 15 local governments, thousands of civil society, because courageous reformers are looking to do the opposite of what we are seeing in these troubling trends. They're empowering citizens, they're rebuilding trust, they're doing the opposite. But it's too few and far between. And what we really need to achieve this promise and to be a countervailing force, we need stronger coalitions with reformers across levels of government, citizens, civic groups, parliamentarians, private sector, propelled by civic activism to advance, scale up these transformative reforms, advance open government, and really serve as a countervailing force to the rise of closed government. And this is needed today because all the traditional champions of open government, all our traditional founders who founded us, US, UK, they have all transitioned. They've gone through dramatic political transitions. Brazil, Mexico, Philippines. Look at it, all of them. And so we are very grateful that Canada under Prime Minister Trudeau is going to be our next co-chair. It has joined leaders from France, Germany, Argentina, Georgia to develop a new coalition of global leaders who's standing up for democracy and openness in today's world. Who thought we could be saying this, that we need a new coalition of global leaders? But this is not going to be enough, because increasingly we see national governments falling prey to authoritarianism and populism. That's why we need local governments to rise up and serve as a countervailing force, as we are seeing with sanctuary cities in the US, as we are seeing in Kigoma, Tanzania, where the national government is repressing, but the Kigoma, which is another pioneer, is standing up to protect civic space. That is why we need local governments to rise up and take the baton for open government forward. So let me close by saying, this is the promise of what you're doing today. This process can show that at a time when across many governments and countries around the world, civic space is under attack and civic space is shrinking, citizens are being repressed, you can show a more hopeful way forward, which actually empowers citizens in governance, builds trust, and delivers on that precious, precious old promise, a government of the people, by the people, for the people, a government that truly empowers and serves its citizens. Thank you.